For 3-89, we're going to talk about solving fraction problems with division. So if I was to do 1 3/8 divided by 3/4, step 1 is to change any mixed numbers to fractions. We can't leave the whole number with a fraction, so we have to change it to an improper fraction. So 1 3/8 is a mixed number. So remember, we're going to do 1 times 8 to get 8, add the 3, and that will be 11. And then we keep the denominator 8. So 11/8 divided by 3/4. That's the problem we're going to work on. Step 2 is we're going to keep the first fraction the same. So 11/8. We'll start with 11/8. But instead of divide, we're going to change division to multiplication. So we're going to put a times sign there. And then what you have to do is you have to flip the second fraction behind the division sign. And that is called reciprocal. So we want the reciprocal of 3/4. In order to do that, we're going to make 4 the numerator and 3 the denominator. And now you just multiply the fractions. So from the last lesson, you might recall that yes, I can do 11 times 4 and 8 times 3. That will give me 44/24. And now I have to simplify that fraction. So this one's not too hard. Both of them have a factor of 4. So when I divide the numerator and denominator by 4, I'll get 11/6. And now I have to change that improper fraction to a mixed number. So 6 goes into 11 once. I will have 5 left over, and I'll keep my denominator 6. So the answer to this division problem is 1 5/6. But if you remember from the last video, I can also look within the problem, the multiplication problem, for cross-simplifying. So if I look at 11 and 3 do not have any common factors, but 4 and 8 have a common factor of 4. So what I can do is divide each of these numbers by 4. So 4 divided by 4 gives me 1, and 8 divided by 4 gives me 2. So now I can multiply my numerators. 11 times 1 is 11, and 2 times 3 is 6. So notice that I get the same answer as I did over here, but my numbers weren't very large. And then, of course, I have to change this again to a mixed number, which is 1 5/6. So let's practice this. So again, remember the first step is to change any mixed numbers to an improper fraction. But all I have is fractions, so I'm good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the 4/5. I need to change the division sign to a multiplication sign. And then I need to flip the fraction 1/2. I need the reciprocal of 1/2. And so the numerator is 2 and the denominator is 1. Now I can just multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators because I don't see that 5 and 2 have a common factor or 4 and 1 that have a common factor. So 4 times 2 is 8, 5 times 1 is 5. But that's an improper fraction. So 5 goes into 8 one time. You have 3 left over, and we keep the denominator 5. For the next one, again, I see 2.5 is a mixed number. I need to change that to a fraction. So to do that, I'm going to do 2 times 2 and then add that 1. So 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, and my denominator is 2. I change the division sign to a multiplication sign, and then I have to flip that second fraction. I want the reciprocal of 3/4. So that becomes 4/3. Now I can multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators, or I can look for any simplifying within the problem. So notice that 2 and 4 can both be divided by 2. They have a common factor of 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now I can multiply the numerators. 5 times 2 is 10, and 1 times 3 is 3. That's improper, so 3 goes into 10 3 times. That'll give me 9. So I'm going to have 1 left over, and my denominator is 3. So that's how you divide fractions. So let's take a look at this word problem. Gerald loves to cook. His aunt bought him 4 pounds of Swiss chocolate. So he has 4 pounds of Swiss chocolate. Gerald's favorite cookie recipe calls for 3/4 pound of chocolate per batch. That's one batch. How many batches of cookies can Gerald make if he wants to use all of that chocolate? Well, if I look at this problem, I know I'm comparing two quantities. I have batches and I have chocolate. And I actually have 3 numbers here. He has 4 pounds of Swiss chocolate. We know that there are 3/4 of a pound per batch. That means one batch. So those are my 3 numbers, 4, 3/4, and 1. I'm looking for that 4th number, so this indicates that I'm going to want a proportion box. So when I make my proportion box, my 2 labels, it looks like I have pounds of chocolate, and then I have batches. Now I know that 3/4 pound of chocolate will give me one batch. So here's my fraction 3/4 for one batch. 3/4 pound chocolate for one batch. I know that his aunt gave him 4 pounds of chocolate, so that goes right there. What I'm looking for is that number right there, X, how many batches. So if we remember from our last unit, to solve this, I have to do 4 times 1, which is 4. And I know that 3/4 times this number also has to give me 4. So if you remember, what we did was 4 divided by 3/4. Now I need these to be fractions because I know 3/4 is a fraction, so I'm going to have to do that with 4. Since 4 is a whole number, I can actually put that over a 1. So it's 4/1 divided by 3/4. Now remember, the rules for division, dividing fractions, means that we have 4/1, but change division to multiplication. And then I need to flip the 3/4, or find the reciprocal of 3/4, which means 4/3. I can't cross simplify anywhere, so this gives me 16/3, but that's an improper fraction. So 3 goes into 16 5 times. That'll give me 15. So I will have 1 left over, and I keep the denominator. So my answer is 5 1/3. For part B, Lauren was bringing food to a party. She brought a 4-foot Subway sandwich and cut it into servings that were each 3/5 of a foot. So what that means is one serving is 3/5 of a foot long. How many servings did she cut if she used the whole sandwich? Well, again, I know I have 3 numbers, 4 feet, servings, there's 1 serving, and 3/5 of a foot. So feet and servings are the 2 labels for this one. So I'm going to set up a proportion box. So I have servings, and I have feet. Now, I'm going to go back to this. It says each serving is 3/5 of a foot. That means 1 serving is 3/5 of a foot. So 1 serving, 3/5 of a foot. We know that she has 4 feet of the sandwich, and we want to know how many servings would that be. So again, if we think of our last unit, I have to cross multiply here. 4 times 1 is 4, and I need to take that 4 and divide it by 3/5. Again, I need this to be a fraction, so I'm going to put 4/1, and now I can multiply. So 4/1, change division to multiplication, and then I need to flip this fraction, so the reciprocal is 5/3. I can't cross simplify, so when I multiply I get 20/3. But that's improper. So 3 goes into 20 6 times. That'll give me 18. And then I'll have 2 leftovers to get to 20. Oh, that's a 2. So 6 2/3. And that's servings. So almost 7 servings, not quite. Now when we get to negatives, here's how we're going to handle this. So for number 91, for part A, I have negative 2 1/8 divided by 1/3. So what we're going to do right now is, first let's talk about changing this mixed number to an improper fraction. So we have to do that. So 2 times 8 is 16, plus 1 is 17. So it's 17/8 divided by 1/3. But with this negative sign right there, we're just going to put it in front of the negative 17, okay? Because that number is that has to be negative. So now, remember, I have to change it. So I'm going to keep the first fraction, negative 17/8, change division to multiplication, and I have to flip that fraction so it's the reciprocal, 3/1. Now I can't cross simplify anywhere, so we're just going to have big numbers for this. Negative 17 times 3 is going to give us negative 51. And if you're not quite sure what that answer is, remember it's 17 3 times. And that's how I got that. And then I know that a negative times a positive is negative. And then for the denominator, 8 times 1 is 8. Well, now this is just a division problem. Negative divided by a positive is going to be a negative answer. So I know my answer is negative. Now 8 goes into 51, 6 times? Because that'll give me 48, and then 49, 50, 51. I'm going to have 3 left over out of 8. So there's your answer for that division problem. Now for part B, the same thing. When I look at the first problem, I have to change this mixed number to an improper fraction. 1 times 4 is 4, plus 3 is 7. So I have 7/4, but that's a negative fraction, so I can just put the negative with the 7. Divided by negative 2/5. Now I need to change this problem. I'm going to keep the negative 7/4, change division to multiplication, and then I need to flip the negative 2/5. Again, I can leave the negative on the top if I want, and then I can flip the 5/2. I just know that that fraction has to be negative. Okay, I can look for cross simplifying. I don't see anything, so now what we're going to do is negative 7 times negative 5 is a positive 35. 4 times 2 is 8. And now change it to a mixed number. 8 goes into 35 4 times, because that'll give me 32. 8 times 4 is 32. And I'll have 3 left over, and then I keep the denominator 8. And again, you can even look at the original problem. I know my answer is positive because a negative divided by a negative should be a positive answer. For the last problem, for part A, so 3-92, solve 16 thousandths divided by 1/4. So again, I keep the first fraction, change division to multiplication, and then I need to flip that second fraction, which is the reciprocal, so I get 4/1. So now, 1,004, those are 2 big numbers. So we could look for any simplifying that we can do. Some kids might divide it by 2. You could also divide each one of these by 4. 4 and 1,000 can both be divided by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 1,000 divided by 4 is actually 250. So now if I multiply across, I get 16 250ths. And the last thing I'd like you to do, write this fraction as a decimal. Now remember, you'd have to take the numerator divided by the denominator. So when you do 16 divided by 250, you're going to get 0.06.